One of President Trump's top cabinet members is picking a fight with the head of the International Monetary Fund. As the markets jump to session highs, we need to tell you this: just one day before the IMF's much-anticipated release of its spring report, which assesses the state of the global economy, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, quote, lashed out at Christine Lagarde and her belief that protectionism and trade barriers hurt global growth. Speaking with the Financial Times, Ross contended that free trade agreements have hurt the U.S. and ballooned our trade deficit. In a Fox Business exclusive, Lagarde opened her offices and her thinking to us on critical issues: why she rejects trade barriers, what she actually has in common with President Trump, and if the U.S. were a train, how fast she thinks it's going. You just touched upon something I believe you have in common with President Donald Trump, and that is the dollar. Right before the Brexit vote back in June, you had warned about a too strong dollar. Here's where you disagree: trade. He calls it fair trade. You're concerned about trade barriers and protectionism. I think you've even called trade restrictions economic malpractice, and that if we were to impose them here in the United States, that would be a, quote, self-inflicted wound. Let me be a devil's advocate here. He would argue that it's economic malpractice if we continue striking trade deals the likes of what we've seen in the past, because every time we have a new deal, we see hundreds of factories close here in the United States.
Can I challenge you on a few of those statements that you just made?
Please do.
Okay. Many jobs in the advanced economies are lost as a result of technological breakthrough, of robotizations, of changes in the manufacturing processes and in the supply chains. Some of them are lost as a result of trade as well, but it's a minor cause as opposed to the major cause, which is technology. But I would be surprised if, just as I am, the President was not in support of free, fair and global trade, because it has benefited the US companies and the US economy at large enormously over the course of time, and it has reduced the price of goods.
One might argue, though, that trade has, at least open border trade, has really sparked the rise in populism. Whether it's America or even in France, their election is less than 2 weeks away. I know you're not taking a stand on any candidate, but the far-right candidate, Marine Le Pen, has said that if she were to win, she would immediately suspend the open borders, and with it some of that trade that is required in the European Union membership. If somebody like her gets elected, how will that affect the European Union and its solidity?
The withdrawal of a large member from that zone would certainly lead to significant imbalances, to major disruption and volatility in that country, but also within the currency zone.
People say that the EU could survive Brexit, but not a Frexit. Do you agree?
You look at the size of partners in this group of 19 countries, and it's clear that France is the second largest partner after Germany. And when you remove such a sizable partner, if that were to happen, then clearly that leads to imbalances, volatility and major disruption.
How do you make the case for the diehard America first, France first, UK first feeling that seems to be sweeping some of these countries, that global organizations such as the IMF serve their interests and their agenda too?
Our mission, given to us back 70 years ago, was financial stability and prosperity in the world. That's what we pursue. No country in the world, however alone it wants to travel, would like to do that in uncertain sea, in stormy water, and with adverse winds.
We don't have stable water in Syria. We have a tsunami at this point. And perhaps at some later point, the IMF is going to be called on to rebuild Syria's economy. How do you convince member nations that that isn't throwing good money after bad?
First of all, we cannot help Syria at the moment precisely because we would be throwing good money after bad. It's a country that is in a state of war, where any effort to reconstruct would be doomed to fail. It has suffered a 60% decline in its growth. It has a 50% inflation rate, and 20% of the population has disappeared. So reconstruction will be needed in order to avoid that the conflict resumes after peace, hopefully one day, has returned to that part of the world.
Christine Lagarde, and of course, outside Syria, that's the most optimistic. Lagarde has been globally since the financial crisis in 2008, but guess what? We saved the best for last. Here's what she thinks of U.S. growth this year.
Because of the amount of uncertainty, the unpredictability of policies of the new U.S. government, how much tax reform will we have, how much fiscal stimulus will there be, how will infrastructure investment be structured going forward. But growth in the United States is certainly better than it was in 2016. And it has consequences not just in the US economy, which is really roaring on full cylinders and generating jobs and increased incomes, but it has consequences in the rest of the world as well.
Christine Lagarde is going to announce tomorrow how she sees U.S. growth, but we got the preview here. Of course, their spring report comes out tomorrow. We'll have it, but you got it already here. She is way more positive than she has been in many years on the U.S. Closing bell, we're